Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on the forgotten collectible card games, trading card games of long ago, which have now fallen by the wayside and don't exist anymore. We're continuing our discussion with Spellfire. Now, of course, Spellfire, when I last left off, I was diving deep into the rules of it to explain to you how to play the game. Today we're going to be talking about the phases of gameplay. So there are effectively 6 phases of gameplay and a 7th gameplay phase, which is a pre-game phase. They're numbered from 0 to 6. 0, of course, being this prequel phase, which isn't really a phase, but you can still do things in there, and hence it is mentioned. You have to take all these phases in order. So you do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The thing is, you only need to take phases 1, 5, and 6 on your turn. These are the most important phases that you need to do. Phases 0, 2, 3, and 4 are all optional. You do not need to play them. Now, what phase 0 is it allows you to play a rules card. I only briefly have talked about rules card. I'll dive into more in a future time, but they add extra rules to the game effectively. This is the point in time where you would play one. And any card in play that would give you an effect that starts at the beginning of a player's turn, yours or another's, would happen now in phase 0. So it's the beginning of turn effects and playing rules cards. Now phase 1, this point you draw 3 cards. This is your attempt to draw from your deck into your hand. Now, of course, if you have any cards in play which allow you to draw extra cards, you would. This is the point in time where you draw the number of cards which is appropriate to whatever your cards in play say into your hand. Minimum 3, of course. That's the basic. Now let's talk about phase 2. This is playing realms and holdings. I'll divide those up each into 2 different sections, sub-phases of this phase. Effectively, the playing realms and the playing holdings. But you should know, you may play 1 realm a turn, and 1 end or 1 holding. That means you could have 1 of each be played during a turn, but you can only play 1 of either of them during your turn. No more. Even if you would have more in your hand, you can only have that maximum number you're playing. Now, when it comes to playing a realms, you're either playing a realm, replacing a realm, or rebuilding a realm. You can only do one of these 3 things. The rebuilding and replacing have to do with raised realms, which I'll again dive into more later on. But if you have an open space, you can play one. That's your 1 realm for the turn. Or, as I'll discuss later, you can move into the rebuilding or replacing phases. That would also count as your 1 for doing either of those actions. Now, for a holding, again, you can only play 1 on your turn. You have to attach a holding to a realm which matches its worlds. So if I have a realm that says Forgotten Realms, and my holding says Forgotten Realms, they can be attached together. But if I only have a Greyhawk realm, I can't attach them. Now, there are other limitations other than only being able to play 1 a turn. You cannot play a holding on a realm that has either just been played or rebuilt. It has to be played on a realm other than those that had just been played or rebuilt, effectively is the way to say it. And once you play a holding, it cannot be moved. It is where it's going to be permanently. Now, phase 3. This is the point in time where you play champions, artifacts, magic items, and spells into your pool. Now, this is also broken up into 2 sub-phases. One of them is the champions, magic items, and artifacts, and the other is the spells. For the champions, magic items, and artifacts, I'm playing them into the pool that I have in front of me. For the magic items and artifacts, I have to attach them to a champion that's within the pool, even one that I'm just playing. For the artifacts, they have to attach to a champion that's from the same world as them. Again, it's the same thing. If the champion's from Greyhawk and my artifact is from Greyhawk, they are compatible. Otherwise, they are not, and I'd have to put it on a different champion, or I couldn't play it whatsoever. Now, this and the next phase, the playing spell phase, they can be taken in any order, or you can flip back and forth between the 2 of them, meaning I could play a champion, play a spell, play an artifact, play a spell, or I could play all my champions, artifacts, and magic items, and then play all my spells, or I could start with my spells and then move on to my champions. The thing about spells is you need an appropriate champion in your pool in order to use it. Other players can play spells which counter or prevent your spells from happening, but those are the only ones that are allowed to play. This is the point in time where spells that specifically are for adding into your pool have to be played. Only you otherwise can play spells during this time. As I said, things like dispelling or countering can have an effect during this time, but they are the only ones your opponents can use. Otherwise, it's only spells that you can have which are played now. Now, phase 4 is your attack phase. This one, you choose an opponent, and then you choose a realm that opponent controls, and that is what you're attacking. You cannot change what realm you're attacking once you've declared it. That is, I've already said what I'm going to do. Now I choose a champion from either in my pool or my hand in order to attack that. Also during this time, both you as an attacker and your opponent as a defender can play spells which alter or affect attacker and defender. So any spells that would be appropriate to this point in time may be cast if you have the appropriate champion to cast it. So the thing is, yes, I've chosen my realm, and maybe I can sort of switch around the champions that I'm using to attack it a little bit, rather than using the one in my pool to play one from my hand. But that's giving the option. Going back and noting to phase 3, which I did forget to mention, that magic items are not restricted by the realm that they come from. I should have mentioned it during this time because this is important to your attacking, what artifacts or magic items might be on the champions you're using to attack. So yes, they could have magic items that will be different from their realm. Now let's though move on to phase 5. Phase 5 is cast any remaining spells that you could cast and adjust your hand size. Effectively, this point in time, your pool is not going to change. Now, there is exceptions if you got something as part of the spoils of war, which is part of the attack, which you just did. Then you can still play those things into your pool or affect your pool. Otherwise, things from your hand cannot affect your pool. Now, granted, there are certain spells which are allowed to be played during this phase, and specifically they will say that. Then you could play those spells. Otherwise, you cannot play any spells that are not appropriate and not adding anything to your pool. Now you discard cards until you go down to 8. Again, you might have something in play which allows you to have more than the maximum normal side of cards of 8. Then you would discard down to the appropriate number if you're allowed to have 9 or 10 or whatever. On the other hand, if you have less than 8 cards, you do not need to discard, nor do you draw up to 8. 8 is the maximum you may have at any time. You're not trying to get to that number. You're just trying to have at most that number at the end of your turn. Again, unless a card specifically says you can. Now the final phase, phase 6, is you rap on the table to signify that it's the end of your turn and the next player to your left can take their turn. Effectively, you're just tapping and signaling that they can take their turn now. Now, victory is achieved in one of 2 ways. The easiest way to achieve victory is to have 6 non-raised realms out in front of you. This implies that you have built your empire. You've been successful at building the empire, which is the goal of the game. Again, they have to be non-raised, and you have to have 6 of them. The other way is when someone would draw out the last card from their deck, and then at the end of their turn, rap on the table, you take a look at what is in play. The player that has the most non-raised realms left wins. If there's a tie between them, you compare the number of raised realms. If that ties, you compare the number of holdings. Again, if that ties, then you truly have a tie game. So there are 3 things to look at if someone runs out of deck space to see who would still be the winner of the game at the end of this turn. So that's it for today. I introduced you to the 7 phases of gameplay, from phase 0, which is a basically introduction turn, to phases 1 through 6, including, of course, 1, 5, and 6 being ones that you have to take, and the rest being optional, so you may not take them. It describes everything from you drawing your cards, to playing them, to attacking your opponents, to then, of course, discarding down to the appropriate number of cards and ending your turn. In the next episode, I'm going to dive deeper into what it means to be in your pool, which I talked a little bit about today, and combat, so you know what it means to be fighting another opponent to try to raise their realms. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows your support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.